Hey, I'm Bryan Fenley. This is the Onto Something podcast, and I'm a broadcaster for Tennis Channel, have done ESPN volleyball, and love me some basketball, which brings me to my guest today. It's Paul Biancardi, recruiting analyst for ESPN. He also is an NBA draft analyst, college basketball broadcaster, does a lot of high school basketball broadcasts for ESPN as well, former head coach in college. He has a beautiful mind, and we're going to explore it in a way in which he normally isn't asked, where we go beyond the game. We're going to obviously talk about his love affair with basketball, but there's so much more there. He's a dad, he's a husband, the upbringing, everything like that is fair game, where we get the wholeness, the fullness of who Paul Biancardi is. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe. Here is my chat with Paul. There's the undeniable love story that Paul Biancardi has with basketball, and sure, we're going to talk about that. But there's the beyond the game story as well. We're going to get the full story of one of the best to work at ESPN, recruiting director there, college basketball, NBA draft analyst, to see him doing broadcasts, college, high school. He was a former head coach in college and has been an assistant in a lot of prestigious institutions. And he joins me on the Onto Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, Fox Sports Radio, Tennis Channel, basketball broadcaster. Love to do volleyball as well. Paul, I'm excited to have you on and tell your story. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Well, Bryan, I'm excited to talk to you. I watch all your interviews, and I learn so much from yourself, other people, and I don't know why you have me on, but we'll knock it out today.
Well, I had to go through like 5 different people to get you on. That's how big of a deal you are. But to be honest, I'm flattered that you watch these and that you consume this content, because like, I come at these with an empathetic, a deep sort of humanistic look at things where I try to understand the person beyond the game. Let's start here.
And Bryan, excuse me 1 second. That's what attracted me to watch your interviews. And if you remember, I reached out to you.
You did, yes.
I did. Look, I reached out to you and I said, what great interviews. You go way beyond the sport, way beyond the profession. We had some dialogue, and next thing you know, we're connected. So that's awesome.
Well, I guarantee you that this will be worth your time, understanding what you just said. As we kick off this conversation, Paul, what are you still trying to find out when it comes to basketball?
Trying to find out how today's player thinks, how they respond, what motivates them, what makes them tick. I'm so intrigued by when players come into the high school game, go to the college game, and then beyond. Some of it's European basketball, some of it's the NBA, and some of it ends after college. So I'm so intrigued on what motivates today's player, how they respond to coaching. And it's really intriguing because in the last 5 years with Generation Z, and now we're in, I believe, Generation X. I don't know if we have any letters left. But, it's so intriguing how you coach today versus when I coached.
How did you respond to coaching as a player, and even now in the media space?
Yeah, I was one of those guys that grew up in the 80s. So I just simply did exactly what my coach told me to do because I looked at him with great respect, right? A figure that was the biggest in my life. Because at times my dad was in and out of my life. So to have a basketball coach, to have a male figure of a sport that I loved telling me what to do, it was always, yes, coach. And how can I do more? How can I do it better? What else do you need me to do? That's the type of player I was.
How were you able to maneuver those times in your life, Paul, when your dad wasn't in your life?
Well, I had a great mom, and she's still here today, 93 years young. And, there's always a rock in somebody's family. And so my mom is the rock and was the rock. So, you get through it. You have great friends. I had a group of friends. We were never indoors. We didn't have iPads. We had TV, but we didn't watch it much. We were always outside, either hanging out or playing sports outside. So you developed a great friendship with a lot of people. Grew up in the inner city in Boston. So there was always an opportunity to do something.
How often, Paul, do you hear your mom's voice influence the way you think to this day?
Probably more now than when I was your age, we'll say. When I was your age, the only voice I really could hear was my own, unfortunately. or other coaches. But as I've gotten older, you hear her voice, and even my dad's voice, more and more, because a lot of the things they taught you might not have been, book worthy, but they were street smart worthy. They were life worthy, and I practice them as much as I can.
Where do you think about your dad the most?
Where?
Yeah. When in life do you feel like he comes to mind?
Sometimes when I'm struggling, because he endured a lot of physical pain because of surgeries, and he was a bricklayer, which means he laid the brick, the foundation of buildings, and he was an artist in many ways, laying brick. They say he was the best in the city of East Boston. I saw some of his work; it was gorgeous. He was very meticulous, very detailed with his work, and his great phrase was always, "If you want something done, do it yourself." And so going through coaching, we'll say, is, sometimes you delegate things to other people, you ask people to do other things. Even within your own family, sometimes you're asking for help. And his words always come into my mind. If you really want it done, do it yourself.
You did it yourself in getting an opportunity to play college basketball. What did you have to do to get that opportunity?
I had to do it myself. I had to really knock down doors, because I was a typical high school player, one of those hundreds of thousands of high school players that was not going to go to play college basketball, but wanted it so bad, where it was a dream, it was a goal. But for me, I think it was more of an obsession, more
Wow.
of a desire to play college basketball. You watched it on TV, right? NBC, CBS back in the day, Dick Enberg, Billy Packer, Al McGuire. I mean, I couldn't wait for Saturdays and Sundays, because that's when the games were on. And I grew up a Boston Celtics fan, so I bleed green, not red. Um, so everything in my life revolved around basketball. So the concept of playing in college, I was enamored with, and so I went to Salem State, which was a Division III school in Massachusetts. Didn't get recruited, but said, you know what, I'm going to walk on. Well, it was a lot harder than I thought to walk on, and I got cut, and I was devastated. My first year in college, rejection, didn't make the team. So I decided to go back and try it again for my second year. And in my second year, in the middle of tryouts, Brian, I come down on a rebound, ankle breaks. So here I am, a sophomore in college, and I'm trying to make the basketball team. Yes, I'm going to class, and I'm passing my classes, probably not to the level that my mother wanted, but I'm going to try for this team again in the third year. So everything I did in the off season, conditioning, drills, camps, the whole bit. And my mother was at a point where, now I'm 20 years old, and she's like, you got to get a job too, because you got to make some money. So I'm working part-time, and I'm training all the time. So finally, in my third year, the head coach was Tom Thibodeau, who now as the Knicks coach. Well, he was an assistant before that. So now he's the head coach of the team, and he actually took me as a walk-on. And I think he took me, well, I know he took me not for my talent, not for my ability, but attitude, the effort, what I brought to practice, the teammate that I was, all the intangibles, all the traits that GMs and scouts and coaches talk about that make up good teammates and good teams. That's what I brought. And I brought an intensity level to practice that he valued. I never played in the games unless we were up big or down big. But finally, I made it. And to get the uniform was special. And then in my senior year, I got a year back because I broke my ankle. He named me captain of the team with two other guys that are friends of mine today. So the moral of the story I tell every kid that wants to play is that there's a home for everyone, but you got to want it badly. And there's so many things you're going to have to do to get there. For me, it was to be a walk-on. To me, that's making it. For others, for others that really want to be part of a college program, if you're not getting recruited, you can be a walk-on if you have the intangibles and you have the traits.
That intensity, Paul, that you showed in practice, that you showed when the games weren't happening, what did that look like?
just a fired up kid who was so happy to be on the court, right? Great story. I did get a few minutes when I was a senior, like meaningful minutes. And Tom said to me, he goes, when I put you in the game, you got to feed the post, you got to screen, you got to defend. Don't shoot it, right? Back then, they would tell you, don't shoot it. Even if you're open, don't shoot. So the first time I get the ball in the wing, my man is like 4 feet off of me. I look at the basket, I glance at the sideline, and I reverse the ball. Kept me in the game.
Oh, it kept you in the game. That idea that you use the word basketball was your obsession. And
I think so.
how early could you trace that before the college days where you felt like life would not be life without a basketball in your hand, seemingly at all times?
Yeah, well, when you grow up in the inner city, there's a lot of sports to play. I played baseball, played football. We played a sport called street hockey. I don't know if you're familiar with that. You're a West Coast guy, but it's an orange plastic ball, nets. You're playing in sneakers. It's almost like flag football, we'll say, on the football side. So I played all these sports. Basketball was the last sport because the weather in Boston is not very, kind to being outdoors in the winter and sometimes in the fall. But then hopefully you could get to an indoor facility. Playing indoors was a treat back then. It was special. So basketball was my last sport. Started about 13, 14. And then I just fell in love with it. And I would go to the playgrounds in the park in the rain, the snow, the heat, didn't matter. I always wanted to, go to the playground because that's where guys were playing all the time.
What has the game given you, Paul, that nothing or no one else has?
That's a great question. I think it's given me a sense of resolve, resilience, persistency, how to deal with adversity, all the things that as coaches, and even now with ESPN, I try to teach today's player, all the intangibles, all the traits. It taught me to work hard. It taught me not to be lazy. It taught me to fight through things that I didn't want to do. So it's taught me all the valuable lessons that I brought into my adult life, my career, my family, and I'm trying to teach my daughters now the same things. So it's done so much for me as a person and certainly as a professional.
So you're teaching your daughters these tools. And for someone like yourself who is always making rankings, whether it's draft class or recruiting rankings, high school, college, into the NBA draft, if we were to get in the most Paul Biancardi of ways, the class that is your nucleus of a family, what is the ranking that you would give your family and yourself as a dad?
Well, my family, I mean, we call ourselves the unbeatable team. So that's our hashtag. And, you're always evolving as a father, as a friend, as a husband. So, over the course of time, hopefully I've made progress in all those areas. But I don't know if I'd rank myself as a dad, or a father, a husband, but I'm a really good friend. I know that to a lot of guys, but the only way you can really judge yourself as a father and a husband is by the people that you're with on a daily basis. Because guess what? They'll tell you the truth.
The idea that you've had such a neat career and your network, as you said, is so vast. How have those people that are in your life, in your inner circle, how have they been there for you, Paul, when you relied on them, when you needed them?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to have friends, I think, is to be a great friend. To be thoughtful and kind and considerate to people, even when they can't do something for you, or once you built a relationship with someone, that relationship is ongoing. It doesn't matter who they are or where they are. I always looked at people by their character and how they treated me. It didn't matter where they coached, how much money they had. None of that ever mattered to me. I never saw wealth. I never saw uh, race. I've never saw anything like that. I saw people, and I gravitate to the people with great character and the people that were kind to me. And I try to gravitate to help people at all times.
How was the relationship that you've had with yourself? How has that evolved over the years?
At times it's been combustible. um, again, I think I'm best when I'm learning from other people, because there's a lot of people, whether they're coaches or just friends I have, and I say, gee, I really love the way this person carries himself. I love the way this person, treats his family. I love the way there's a lot of great examples for me out there. So the more I keep learning from other people, it makes me a better person. But, you know, when I got married, my wife was the head coach at Boston College. She was soccer. And, I can tell you this, and she knows it, and my girls know it. She made me a better person. She made me a better man. And so, yeah, I mean, you always think you're good at what you do and you're a pretty good person. She can humble me very quickly. And she also could point out things that I needed to be better at over the course of time in her own way. And she's made me a much better man.
If I were to ask her, Paul, how she humbles you, what would she tell me? In what ways does she do that to you?
She tells me the truth. She gives me alternatives on ways that I should have maybe handled things. Uh, but undying support and love, right? That's the sign of a great relationship and marriage. And so yeah, she would always tell me, hey, you could have did this better, or you need to do this more. She also enhanced my spiritual life. I was one of those, Catholics from Boston, go to church on Sunday, pray on Sunday, and then the other 6 days of the week you live your life. And so, she brought my faith and my spirituality to a different level, which I'm very thankful for. So that's given me some great peace. It's given me a lot of perspective, and it's made me a better man.
How has the peace and the perspective made you that better man? And if you had that earlier on in your life, what would have been different about those early stages of your life?
Well, I just think I wasn't patient, when I was younger, whether it was my career, my personal life, or anything. I was very persistent, which was good. It's a great trait to have, but then the lack of patience, and then you say things that you regret. You have some outburst, and at times those aren't good, and that doesn't solve anything, and it doesn't bring peace to any relationship. So I think that's where I've really grown is the area of patience. Now my daughters will say that I'm still not patient, but I am so much more patient than I've ever been.
How do you show your daughters that you love them?
Spend time, pay attention to what they say, be a great listener. And I think when I was coaching, I wasn't a great listener. My daughters would tell me things that, you know, what went on in their day. And I'm thinking about the scouting report from Michigan. It's up here. Or what recruit I have to call next while someone's talking to me. And so I wasn't present. As much as I was physically present, mentally, I probably wasn't as present as I should have been. And I think a lot of coaches go through that because we're so consumed with our job. And you can say that about a lot of professions. But I didn't just take my job home with me. I did my job around the clock. And sometimes that mentality makes you really good at what you do because you really become, you build your craft. You become better at scouting, recruiting, studying film, whatever it is that you're doing more of it. So you're getting better at it, but you're neglecting the people around you, not neglecting in a sense of, you're not around, you're just there, but you're not listening. And I think the skill of listening, spending time, telling them that I love them multiple times a day, which they call me annoying. So when they say I'm annoying, then I know I'm being a good dad.
Well, I was going to say, how do they react differently now with this more centered, peaceful presence and that better listener that you are in this version of Paul Biancardi?
Well, the disclaimer is that's the way I am now. When I first took the job at ESPN, I still had that coaching mentality. So it's been a process. So I'm much better now than I was 10 years ago. But I think they like it. They enjoy it. It's like coaching. You got to know your tone on who you're talking to. When you're coaching today's player, they have to know that you care about them. Obviously, my daughters and I, great love there, but how I approach it, because sometimes they'll hit the snooze button on me. They love the snooze button. So I have to break that barrier down of the snooze button. So it's what I say, when I say it. Timing is a big thing, and your tone.
And it's with all of those things coming together that you're going to get them to be most attentive to what you're saying. If you were, and you were Wright State's head coach a little more than a decade ago, if you were the head coach of Wright State, knowing what you know, the experience that you've gained since that experience, how would you have led that job differently? Or what would you have done uniquely that maybe you have a vision or an understanding now that you would have liked to have put in when you were the Wright State coach in the 2000s, early 2000s?
Well, I was an assistant for a long time, about 17 years. So I was pretty well groomed to be a head coach. You're never ready for it, but I was prepared in many ways. In other ways, I didn't know what to expect. So that preparation of 17 years, that really helped me make a lot of decisions. It helped me on how I manage the staff, manage the team. But if I had to do it, differently this time, I think patience, tone. I talk to everyone the same. And for some guys, that was fine. For other guys, I probably didn't communicate and connect with them well enough. And I didn't get the most out of them. So, what's your job as a coach? To get the most out of your team. The only way you can get the most out of your team is to get the most out of every player. And so, I think that my approach to certain players would have been different. And certainly, I would have changed my language. I can't say that it would be perfect, but it wouldn't be as bad as it was sometimes. And the yelling, constant yelling. And why do you yell? Because you think they're going to do it better if you yell more. Actually, I was probably shutting them off and shutting them down, but yelling made me feel great.
Let me leave you with this, Paul. And Paul Biancardi is with me, of course, with ESPN analyst, NBA draft, high school rankings, college basketball broadcaster as well. The openness you are to changing your ways, that's not something everybody has, but you've tapped into that. What has it taken for you to be open to doing that?
I think time. I mean, time makes you see things differently, and it gives you great perspective. I've had great experiences in coaching and at ESPN, so I think my perspective is at a high level, and my patience is much better. So I just think that over the course of time, you see things a little differently. I still have the same desire, still the same persistency, work ethic. All those things were ingrained since I played for Tom Thibodeau. And so it's a nice combination to have the two, and hopefully I can stay on the same path.
Having those two, a big reason why you do an incredible work at ESPN, as you recently announced signing a multi-year deal with ESPN, renewing your time with ESPN recruiting director, obviously college basketball and NBA draft analyst, and all around good guy. People know you, Paul, for everything you're doing basketball wise, but this is a look into that other side of your life, giving people an added appreciation for what you do. And so as we wrap up this conversation, I'm Bryan Fenley. Paul, thanks so much for going down that road with me and talking ball, but then understanding that there's so much more to you. There's the dad, there's the husband, there's what you went through as a child that all plays into who you are now. And it was a brilliant conversation, and appreciate your transparency.
Brian, thanks for letting me tell my story, as you say, and I enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see your other interviews in the future. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks.